Good morning, everybody. And I'm Cindy Sundell from Georgia Tech, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this Bench2Market talk on what are we calling this? This is on customer discovery and business model development. And we have some folks here from both the NSF ICOR program and also the NIH ICOR program. So we're going to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting these two different programs. But before we get started, just wanted to remind you that this Bench2Market series is sponsored by a number of folks here: Biolocity, the Georgia CTSA, Georgia Institute of Technology, and Emory University. This is a schedule for some of the upcoming events. The next event is going to be on commercialization funding on December 20th. So that promises to be very interesting. And it will be covering several different areas, both devices, therapeutics, drug delivery, and health IT. After that, on January 7th, there it is. The next topic is going to be intellectual property strategy, and we're fortunate to have James Raines, who is professor of practice at Georgia Tech, who's going to talk about patentability, freedom to operate, prior art patent strategies. So that should prove to be very interesting. But I know that is a topic that we're all very interested in this particular space, life sciences. Again, today's topic is going to be on customer discovery, business model creation, with a focus on the ICOR programs from NSF and NIH. And we're really fortunate to have Julie Collins here. She's a National Innovation Corps instructor for the National Science Foundation. And she actually knows a lot about both programs. And so she's going to, I think that she's going to be provide some very interesting input on that. We have Nakia Malacio. Nakia is a startup catalyst at Georgia Tech in the Advanced Technology Development Center. And we have Esther Chen. Esther is a PhD candidate, and she was a technical lead in a NSF ICOR team that finished up a couple of months ago. And so she's going to be able to, it's fresh in her mind, and she'll be able to tell us about her experience, pros and cons, and we also have Gayatri Srinivasan, who is the executive director for, what is it again? Corporate Relations here at Emory. And she has also been through the NIH program, and so she can answer any questions you have about that. So without any ado, I think we'll get started. I guess I'll start with Julie. Maybe you can help explain what is the ICOR program. Can you?
Sure, I'll try to be succinct. So in 2010, 2011, there was a movement in the startup community, mostly out of Silicon Valley, with a guy named Steve Blank, who was looking at the way that we were funding and building startups. And essentially it was a group of people who were VCs saying, well, these are my guys. This looks interesting. I look at market studies. That looks okay. Let's throw some money at it. And if they really looked at the hit rate, it wasn't that great. And Steve looked at his success and said, why have I been successful? And he basically wrote out what he had done in a book. And if anybody read the 4 Steps to Epiphany, that was his previous book. He wrote it more as a manual and actually taught it to engineers. It was the first course. It was a real business course that was taught to engineers and scientists and not taught in an MBA school. And this was called the Lean Launchpad. The National Science Foundation saw what Steve was doing at Stanford and Berkeley and said, we pour a ton of money into academic research. And a lot of times this academic research is not really going anywhere. Not that everything needs to be commercializable, but we need research to be moving in that direction. In fact, I'll kind of give you a tangent. Every component in the iPhone is essentially funded by federal dollars. If it wasn't for federal money, we would not have the iPhone. It's just that Steve Jobs put all the pieces together and made it into a package. So the NSF said, how do we accelerate this? Could we take what Steve Blank is doing, and could we make a program out of it? That's where the Innovation Corps was born. ICOR is what they call it. And NSF was the sponsor of that, and it's really something you should be proud of with your federal tax dollars. Fast forward to now, to 2019, all of the federal agencies participated in some form or another. NSF is the one that holds kind of the trademark, the name. They run a national program where scientists from universities can form teams, apply for a grant, and get paid to go do this business course, which essentially is a boot camp where you create your hypotheses about what you think it would take to launch your technology, and you go talk to real people. It really is boot camp. The NIH has now taken this program and said, well, we give all this money to companies in the form of SBIR non-dilutive funding. We'd love for them to be more successful. So they actually have a program, I'm an instructor of that as well, where we have companies that have already formed and have scientists, and they have to go through the same process. And what's interesting is many of them don't know any more than the academics I teach in the NSF course, even though they have a company. What you guys should also be really aware of is that, because this is, I think, part of the ACTSI, right? NCATS from NIH piloted last year. So I taught at UPenn, their medical center, with an NCATS specific course. And they're launching, if they get funded in February, they're launching another program for specific NCATS translational scientists. Really looking at, if you want to have better R01s, if you want to have better translational science, even if you don't want to be the person to launch it into a company, you need to be doing science and getting funded on things that are going to be the next wave. And so those types of training programs are sponsored by NCATS. So I could go on. There's lots of programs all over the country that had kind of originated from Steve Blank. But it's basically a customer discovery. Means you make a hypothesis about what you think is true in the world. You identify who you need to speak to ask that set of questions, and you go and ask those questions to a real person. You don't do any research on the web or in papers or that sort of thing. You actually talk to people.
Thanks, Julie. One of the things I forgot to do is have you introduce yourself and say, how did you end up doing this, and what kind of training did you have to go through?
Sure.
That's an approved
instructor. That's a funny, I don't know. None of our career paths are ever linear. Anybody ever tells you your career path's going to be linear, it's not going to be. And a long time ago, I was the director for the SBIR program and this whole state of Georgia. And so essentially I was working with startups and more existing companies to think about how to get this funding stream into their company to better fund them. And it was at the same time that Georgia Tech was starting as one of the nodes at Georgia Tech for the I-Corps program for the National Science Foundation. And they were expanding their faculty body because you have to have enough faculty members to teach this. And they knew who I was. And the way that I consulted with companies, the way I talked to them, the way I don't know, they said looked similar to what they were doing. So did I want to try it out? And I was a trainee for a long time. I was an adjunct instructor for many courses until somebody said I had to go to national certification or whatever.
Why don't we go in? Nikki, do you want to start? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Our paths are somewhat similar. I work with a bunch of companies as well too in that space, and most recently, actually, I started reviewing proposals for NSF and for Venture Well. I've been a mentor through the I-Corps program for a while now, and I focus a lot on helping people like you move research to commercial markets, which is somewhat of an arduous task. And if you don't know how to navigate the landmines, it can be a very disastrous thing. But also brutal enough to tell you that there is really no business model here. But also passionate enough to say, okay, let's really, if you do see a business model, let's figure out what is the best path to get this to commercialization. And sometimes that takes a step back and look at research to what is actual business, and how do we apply the right principles and tools to help you commercialize anything out of a university. So I spend most of my time at Georgia. Well, I work for Georgia Tech, but I spend most of my time at ATDC, where I coach probably anywhere from 15 to 20 companies per week, which is crazy. Trying to scale that back, but also do a lot of stuff in the ecosystem around the United States as well, and working with startups out of other universities as well. Like I was just recently in your class week before at the MIT Hackathon. So I work with a lot of startups in this whole space as well.
Yes, I'm a PhD student in biomedical engineering, which is actually Georgia Tech and Emory. And I joined the lab I'm currently in back in April, and then the program started in August. And the way I got involved in the I4 is through one of the postdocs in our group. So she had developed this technology during her PhD back at Imperial College in London, and was now looking to commercialize and needed a technical lead for the team. And so I joined the lab, and she basically just asked if I was interested.
So my path, just like Julie mentioned, is extremely circuitous. So I was prepping for the linear road. I did my postdoc at MIT, and I wanted to become an academic. And I realized my scientific interests were very basic science and fundamental sciences. So not much funding opportunities for somebody to take me. So I reinvent myself. I started out in MIT's licensing office. So that's where I got a first taste of entrepreneurship, startups, and the likes. And so after working at MIT for a licensing office for a couple of years, I moved on to UMass Medical School, where I did licensing, sponsored research, and I was the executive board member for their incubator, which is called M2D2, which is Massachusetts Medical Device Development. So I was helping with entrepreneurs in the Massachusetts area with their business plan, IP strategies, licensing strategies. And then I started at a startup as the business development person. The startup was an oxymoron in the sense that it was a non-profit startup in type 1 diabetes, did not have a product, it had a services. So, but it had to keep its lights on. So whether it's a non-profit or for-profit, you have to do what you have to do to make it work. So that got me right in the startup arena to learn how startups work. And then I came to Emory, and I was very surprised from the Boston area coming into Atlanta that Emory does not have an entrepreneurship center. So I was like, wow, does that mean we don't have any entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs? And that's not true. We have a lot of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial activity. We just don't have it in a center or a centralized manner. We have it very diversified or decentralized. And so from then on, anybody who breathed the word entrepreneurship or center, I was there in those conversations. So as part of all these, a few years ago, I was part of I4 team, but an NIH I4 team. So it was already a formed company. It was the PI is faculty from Georgia Tech. And the CEO lead is also from Georgia Tech, and I was the business lead for that company. It was an extremely interesting experience. It was a boot camp that says 8 weeks, but it's always 4 weeks prior and 4 weeks after. So it's more than 8 weeks, and it is brutal because they say it's 5% of your time. It is not 5% of your time. It is like I was doing full-time work during the day, doing whatever I do, and then I had to wear the other hat and be the business lead for that company. It was excruciating, but it was great. So I'm happy to share my learnings.
So maybe a good question right now for everybody would be to compare and contrast the two programs and how how they're different, how they're the same, and how they're different. I don't know. I'll start with Julie.
Sure. So one of the main differences is who's allowed to be a part of any of the programs. So if you have to have, with the NSF program, you have to have grant lineage. You have to have somebody that says you've previously had an NSF grant. Most of that is by academics out of universities that have had an NSF grant. However, the nation has a ton of different site programs where you can go through a very tiny short course, 3 weeks or so. And that gives you a lineage through that university that has that grant. And so then you're allowed to apply for the national program, which gives you $50,000 as a travel grant to go out and do this customer discovery. In terms of the pace, The program with the NSF is much more targeted towards academics, so you're learning the fundamentals of a business model. The pace is rigorous and fast, but you're not going to learn as much as you do with the NIH program. The NIH program, you have to be a company, you have to have an SBIR phase 1 from the NIH, so it's a very narrow pool. It's easier to get into the NSF program. You're a company, and it's also really targeted towards med device therapeutics and diagnostics and lab tools type things, and they track you. So you have one faculty member that really has experience with bringing like therapeutic to market. Then you have a set of faculty members, I'm one of those, who we call canonical, and we are the methodology coaches. So we rotate and help you understand the methodology, but you also have somebody who provides a little bit more consulting. In the NSF, it's all coaching. We're not going to give you the answer. We're going to ask you why, whether or not what you have told us back is actually valid. Who did you talk to? It's a sort of inquisitorial style of interrogation. When you have to report out your findings every week. In the NIH, you have a little bit more of consultation with, and what year did you go through the NIH?
I went through, before it became a requirement for SBIR phase 1 to be part of it, so I went through in 2016.
In 2016. So we are now about to launch the 2020 course, and I'll say that a lot of things have changed.
Yeah.
And one of those is that there really is a lot more hands-on. All of the faculty members that are doing experts now, it is more work, but they have office hours with you every week. It's mandatory. And they walk you through sort of this formula because you're a company, and they want you to come out with a business model estimate. They want you to really know, have all of this sort of documents in order to launch into your phase 2 grant.
Right.
So it's,
And how do you go about applying for
the application. So for the NSF program, if you have an NSF grant, it's a simple 1-page form that you submit to something at nsf.gov. It's my me, there's like there's an email address. If you've never had lineage with an NSF grant, you should get involved with either the ACTSI NCATS program, with Georgia Tech's regional program, if they have a regional program. There are site programs. I can't tell you who has what. Does Georgia Tech still have a site program?
Yeah.
And Georgia State also has one, and I think UGA also has one.
Yes, UGA does definitely have one. So what these site programs are they're essentially a grant that was given to the university that allows them to put on a short course so you kind of get a taste of what you're going to get into, which I will very much recommend, so that you understand what you're committing to. And it also gives you a little bit of travel money to maybe go to like I personally recommend, if you do a site program, to identify maybe a conference that you would like to go to, a trade show where there's some companies and some people that you would really be interested in talking to that you wouldn't otherwise, so you're not going to run into, and see if they would pay for your travel to go to that trade show.
Yeah. And it's really, it's pretty easy to get that sites grant. And so the bar is not all that high, and it's very useful. We usually require that you, like I said, do a little bit of training, and then you have this money to go out and do 10 or 12 interviews or something like that. So it's just a really good opportunity to do a little bit of customer discovery, get a taste of the larger IPO program. And again, if you don't have the NSF provenance with the particular technology you're interested in commercializing, then you need to go through the sites to be able to qualify.
And you also need to have the appropriate team. So after you have the team that you go forward with is an entrepreneurial lead, a technical lead, and a mentor. And so you have to find those people who are going to compose the team. And you can even have more people than that, but you have to have those 3 roles.
And I wanted to alert you to one distinct feature between NIH and NSF that I experienced, was that in NIH, all 3 have to equally participate in the customer discovery. Equally participate means that there are 100 interviews, then you either are on all 100 or at least have your third that you are covering and are taking ownership on. Whereas in the NSF one, it's not like that. There is one the student typically, or the postdoc typically.
The
does
entrepreneurial lead,
That's
is
most
on
of their interviews.
it's their responsibility. And everybody can do the interviews, but it's the entrepreneurial lead doing all the presenting,
Right.
the consolidating data and all that.
In the NIH, it's
We didn't get that memo, they told us we all had to go.
So what is the minimal team for the NIH programs?
It's all the same.
yeah.
It's the same.
It's the same.
Okay, you need the TL, the
You need a
entrepreneurial
P,
lead.
they call it a PI, you have to have the PI. You have to have,
Executive, I think.
the executive, yeah, that they require whoever is CEO of the company to participate.
So it's the PI, who's the CEO?
Not always.
Okay.
Sometimes they share that role, sometimes they don't. But the CEO of the company has to participate.
Okay.
You have to have a technical person and you have to have a business person.
So in my case, the PI was the CEO of the company, but to be able to participate in this ICO programming, he was the PI and he had a friend of his with whom he collaborates to be the CEO.
So who's speaking at there are weekly webinars, right?
Yes,
And,
3 hours long.
okay, so that's a difference. So with the NSF program, it's about hour and a half, 2 hours, like that, on a weekly basis. It's a little bit longer,
Yeah.
the webinars, and you must, here's another thing about this program. It's mandatory that the team participate in the opening and closing sessions and the weekly webinars. And they are checking on that. You need to have your camera on, and they expect everybody on the team to be participating. If you don't participate, they can actually pull the grant from you. And they're pretty strict about that.
And they very, strict is a very kind word.
Yeah.
They will actually call you out and kick you out.
Yeah.
So if you are not behaving in you are expected to behave or do your job, do your work, and if you're not up to snuff, then you will be kicked out.
Yeah.
And you'll be called out, and it's public shaming.
Right.
I've
So-
seen, fortunately, in the NIH.
Okay. We had two teams.
Were you
Shake
there?
that. No.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's changed.
It's not like that anymore?
Not in the NIH.
Okay.
But
NSF
yes, participation
NSF
is mandatory, public shaming has gone away.
That is right. That is so nice to hear.
Christy Canaria has made a,
I like that. A woman. decided
And
not
Christy
to.
is awesome.
I like that.
See,
And it's very good.
I have to say, NIH is less about public shaming than NSF is what I've heard. But there is still that, embarrassment because you are lead PIs in your institutions and you will be called out and kicked out.
So I had
It's quite
heard
embarrassing.
that about these programs, and when I went through it, just a couple of months ago, I did not feel, I thought that everything was very respectful.
Oh.
I don't know,
it's
Yeah.
changed.
yes.
Depends on who
I'm
who
sorry.
you're talking to.
Yeah.
Depends on who you're talking to.
So Nikki, what
Someone
was
is
your experience?
real tough on you. I'm not gonna say her name, Julie, but No,
What's your experience going through that?
it's a great experience. I mean, I see why they want us to all participate as a team. It's very important. We're all out there doing interviews. We're traveling together, we have Ubers together. We're having dinners together. There is no excuse for the only thing's all with death and family and sickness. The only two things they let you out. We were all traveling to 2 different parts of the country, and our flights were like right in between the time that we had to be on the webinars, and we were like, oh God, I don't know if we're gonna be able to make it. And there was no excuse whatsoever. Even if we had to miss that flight, we had to be on those webinars. So that's how serious the program is. But it's good. We had a great team, great chemistry. We rocked and rolled. We got 212 interviews. It's still more challenging, and so we did our thing, and it was good.
Let me back up for just 1 second, because we keep talking about all of these interviews. The really big idea here is, especially if you're in the medical space, is that you may understand use case, you may understand unmet need, clinical needs. That's what you're trained to do.
Right.
The question is, what does it take to get something adopted? Who makes purchase decisions? How do you have to distribute this product? What would it take to set up a company that runs its own operations, has partners in distribution channels, and does sales and marketing? What activities would you actually perform and who's gonna actually be the person who pays for that product so that you really can fulfill that unmet need, right? And so it's the process of being very systematic. In the past, you would sort of go talk to some people who had been there, done that. You might go talk to Nakia and say, hey, in your space, how do I do this? And what we're trying to unravel is to say, you actually should figure this information out yourself, and you shouldn't rely on market data. So we take you through a very systematic process of saying, okay, tell me what you think it's going to take and who's going to actually use, let's say you've got a laparoscopic device. Okay, what type of surgeon? In what type of hospital? How many times are they a salaried surgeon, or are they a pay-per-use surgeon? What is the ownership structure of the hospital? Now go find some of those people and have some conversations and figure out when was the last time they adopted a new tool? What did it look like? Who did it come from? Like, have those conversations. And so it's this process of sort of taking a systematic approach and then qualitative data and trying to merge the two together. And that's why you hear all this sort of discordance of, it's a difficult program because it's not necessarily, it's not like going and doing an experiment and you get a very nice clean line. Yes, that's a positive, this is a negative. You're getting a bunch of qualitative data. And at some point in time, you have to stand on your 2 feet and say, I believe this data, it's enough, I'm moving on.
Yeah, and just to, although we say customer discovery, it's not customers that that's going to be using the end product. It's not that. It's customer discovery around the business model canvas. So for every, it's like a map. So for every location on the map, there is a different customer that you have to interview and understand whether the product that you're making works or not. And then at every point in that map, you have the ability to pivot and change the customer. And try to see, okay, if I change it a little bit, will that new customer profile be able to, it's like routing a product through a pipe, right? So each node on the pipe is your customer. So you need to interview those sets of customers.
I think one of the hardest things that I see scientists and researchers is being able to suspend their bias and suspend everything that they know to go into the field to really do true customer discovery, to Julie's point, to really understand the problem from their perspective, not from your perspective. It's easy when you go into those, I call it those intellectual narcissistic conversations where you go in, well, I know this and I know this, well, I know this and I know this, but then you walk out and no one ever finds what the problem is. And so if you're not able to suspend your bias to really understand, as we say, the day in the life of what their problem that they're trying to solve and how they actually solve that physical problem. And if you're selling into a hospital system, like, is it really, what's the value to that? So take, for instance, like 30-day readmittance is an issue in hospitals. So if you're selling a solution that helps reduce that and understand that there's a 3% reimbursement back to the hospital for the challenge of patients being readmitted and the cost of that, if you don't understand everything about it and like really surgically dissect that process, you really don't understand who you're selling to or why you're selling to them, or why should they use or why should they adopt your tool. And that's what customer discovery does if you're doing it in the right context, but asking the right questions, not just tell me about your job, tell me what you do, tell me where you're from, but knowing the types of questions that you should be able to ask. And our team is really good at really sitting down, what are the specific questions that we want to ask so that we will know how to segment these different segments to know instantly this customer segment is not our customer segment, but this one is. But then now what questions do we need to ask them based off of previous data, previous information, to making sure that we're really drilling in on the specific question, because we found segments that we thought we might have wanted to pursue, but our tool wasn't ready for that specific segment. We found a segment that we had been on the beginning stage of what we found that if we were not in preclinical, that we weren't useful, that because when FDA approved, they approved the whole process, and if we weren't part of that process, then our tool was not going to be able to be approved with that. So we would have never found that out if we weren't asking the right questions and talking to the right people when we were doing customer discovery.
Esther, would you like to talk a little bit more about your specific experience? And maybe giving a little case study, just a brief one would be helpful for everybody.
Yeah, so for me, it was an amazing experience. So I come into this program not knowing a lot about the field. Anna gave me like a crash course on her technology and her previous experience. So she'd done a regional ICOR, which was those 3 weeks down at MD Anderson. And so she's like, but this is how the program works. Now we're going to do the nationals. It's a lot bigger. We have to do a lot more. And so she basically had this idea where she wanted to go, and the way I basically managed to support her is through organization, scheduling, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, she basically came up with a big plan. So our customer segment, which we came in thinking was bioprocess engineers, and we didn't know exactly where or how to get to them in their workspace. So she chose the program that in the time period where there are 2 of the largest industrial conferences, so we'd have access to these people there. And so, yeah.
So how did all of the 100 interviews you did, how did that change your initial idea of your business or your value proposition that you thought going in? How did that evolve, or did you pivot?
Yeah, so we did the first 100 interviews, and one of the conferences was in that time, which helped greatly with the numbers. And we ended up with a ton of information, and we're like, we don't even know what to do with all of this. So we actually had to take a short break in the middle and just analyze all this data that we'd gotten. And we kind of sorted them and figured out, okay, so we thought it was just these bioprocess engineers, but there's bioprocess engineers here, here, and here in these different industry segments. So let's look into those. So then we went for our second round of interviews, which was the next 100 interviews or so, where we then looked into these different segments and then found, oh, this segment is not our customer, this one is. And then within this one, actually within the companies themselves, there's these different bioprocess engineers in different stages with different priorities. And so that was really interesting for us.
Yeah, but to her point, there was one industry that we never even thought about, was the food industry. Like the Good Food Institute,
Yeah.
and like all the people who make the Impossible Burgers and all that stuff. You know, we completely found a whole new industry because we were listening. People consistently kept saying, well, try this specific industry, try this particular industry, and we kept listening, and it's a whole segment that I felt that we would include into our whole customer discovery. And God, man, we talking about, it was like they're unregulated, Wild Wild West, there's no rules. I mean, just like, you know, totally perfect, you know what I mean? Like, we don't have to go through all these regulatory hurdles, we don't have to jump all these hoops, you know, so it was like, man, we hit jackpot here, so.
I think that happens a lot. And it's really interesting to see all the teams present at the beginning and at the end and see how, you know, they've evolved. And it used to be, they don't do it now, and starting with my cohort that I went through, but it used to be that you would make a go, no-go decision at the end of the class and decide, is this something that you're really gonna, after these 100 interviews, are you still interested in moving forward with the company? Do you think it still has legs? Now, they don't ask that question. It's more, what are your next steps? Nakia, were you in a cohort where they asked you to make a go, no-go decision?
Yeah,
Did you guys, what was your decision?
Yeah, we were a go. I
Yeah.
mean, there was no question that, you know, I mean, there was so much interest in what we were doing. And to think of a simple tool of providing media to, you know, reading strategies and all that they were doing, were taking media themselves and mixing it. And like, this is the big pharma industry, and they're kind of bootlegging stuff to kind of, you know, trial and error. So like, okay, we got the perfect tool for you, you know. So, but we realized that we needed a partner. We still needed more validation. There were still other things that we needed that was inside of that go decision. So it wasn't just, okay, let's go do a business. Now the work really started after that go, because there was so much more that needed to accompany that go decision.
Are you guys back to the lab to do more things?
Yes.
Or is that,
Partially, yeah.
Question about that. Could you guys share a little bit about how one conducts the interviews for folks that might not be joining the next group for ICOR? What are some of the things that people can implement as they talk to potential users or customers today?
Right. So typically you are instructed not to start with your product in mind. So you are instructed to build with the customer in mind. So you are asking questions for the customers to eventually come up with a solution. And you're hoping that the solution is what you are actually building as a product. So that is a very critical and important step in the interview process itself. So you may, especially in the NIH side of things, it is kind of complicated because you are already a company, you already have a product. So how do you not bring that bias in your interview questions? So so we as a team have to spend a lot of time devising the questions and making sure that you stay away from leading them to
Yeah, I think at the beginning, Anna was so excited about her tool that she was like selling, and I think that the teaching.
Explain myself.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, so I'm trying to find a good example. So, like, if you had a solution that could solve this particular problem, or start telling you, well, we do this particular type of technology, it's like that kind of leading the witness, then kind of selling kind of thing. So we had to kind of figure out, let's kind of rein Rebecca. She was just so excited, like, I know I got the best thing in the world, and she was good, and everybody was sucked into her, and like, she's just got that energy about her. But one of the things that we as a team discussed was we needed to make sure that the questions that we ask can't be the same across each segment, each person. They have to be very personalized to the individual. So if you're talking to an extremely technical person, make sure that you're asking the technical enough questions that's in line with what their job is, that uncover what their problems that they're having, and not leading them into it, but asking those real good questions. And then sitting back, listening to the responses, but also listening for the insights when they give you those little nuggets that are outside of those questions. Because often if you follow that trail, it'll lead to something else, or it'll lead to another industry person that you can interview. So you have to be very surgical, tactical, and intentional with the questions that you ask, so that when you're in the interview process, that you can honestly say, this is not a segment, this is a segment. We gained some information, we did not. And I can tell you this, if you go through ICOR, the teaching team is extremely good in sniffing out BS, and good at sniffing out when you're leading the witness, and good at sniffing out when you're selling. So be honest, trust the process, ask good questions, sit down with your team. And we divided up the work, we divided up everything. And, if Anna was asking a question and then they asked her a business question, and I was able to chime in and say, here's what they're saying from the technical side, but here's the business aspect of it, then Anna would chime back. And so we just had a great chemistry as it relates to the questions that were being asked. So that's my thought on that.
It's also, it's a recommended 95 to 5 ratio, where 95% of the time you're listening and 5% of the time you're talking.
Right.
And you really kind of evolve and learn that over time. That's encouraged.
Shauna, to be real specific about what you guys are going forward and thinking about whatever research you're doing, or whatever new sort of product ideas you might have or innovations you might have, to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who might actually use your technology and dissect out your thought process of what are they doing today that takes the place of what I'm doing? And are they satisfied with it? Where did they learn that either process, or where did they buy that product? Who do they report to? Then taking just the technical aspects of how they're doing their job, and then taking it to another level and saying, okay, who do they report to? How much authority do they have? Do they have authority to adopt new products or services or not? And then to take it up another level and say, from a business perspective, the organization that they run, that they work for, runs a complete business model itself. Are they the type of company that is innovative and likes to buy things from startups and likes to try new products and services? Or are they what we call in the industry a laggard? Are they somebody who waits until everybody's using the iPhone and they're still using the Motorola flip phone, right? Then they finally decide that they're the type of company. So it's really also thinking about what Nakia was saying about being precise with the types of questions, but also dissecting them and saying, these are the technical questions, but I also have to understand how much authority you have and what is the business model of the organization that you work for, And then looking back and saying, okay, am I disrupting that in a positive way for them? Or am I disrupting that in a negative way? To where I may develop this product and I may try to go out and sell it to them, and I'm gonna get to the table and I'm gonna do my sales pitch and somebody's gonna go, yeah, no thanks.
Right. And then there's observational customer discovery too. We did a couple of that where we didn't really ask them any questions. We just went and watched their process. That's when we went to Davis, California, for the media lab. And we just went into their lab and we just watched their process, the whole manufacturing, how they're mixing the media. We didn't just have very little questions. We watched what they did to see if it was really in line with industry and other things that we were finding in customer service. But that was also very helpful as well too. So if you're a medical device, therapeutic surgery, anything like that, if you can get clearance, ask, hey, can we watch the surgery? Hey, can we watch how you're building this medical device? Hey, can we watch how it's being applied? Or hey, can we watch how you're using this device actually in a therapeutic setting or rehabilitation setting? Because you'd be surprised the information that you will find from that to actually see the actual use case. Because you may think that the problem was, the treatment that was being applied, but then you may find, hey, no, it's actually manufacturing processes, which is the actual problem. The devices that's causing this problem, they're being able to implement it in a therapeutic setting, whatever it may be. But doing observational customer discovery allows you to see things very real time, and it gives you the opportunity to take a step back and say, oh, let's rethink some of the questions or rethink our approach as well too.
Anybody else have a question?
Does talking to customers always work? What if the customers don't know what they don't know?
It's a great question. So part of that is learning to build your archetype and knowing who to speak to and who, and it's also, so I will recommend to all of you, the process is really transformative from a career perspective, because learning how to have a conversation with somebody and realizing this is not somebody I need to be talking to, and learning to politely say, thank you for your time, I don't want to waste any more of your time, is an art in itself. And so you are constantly, to what Nikita is talking about, thinking about, I had an idea of who this person is that's going to use, purchase, make the decisions about my technology. Did I get it right? And you're going to be in a lot of conversations where you find out you were wrong, especially in the medical space, especially if you're doing something with surgeons or surgical tools, right? There's a lot of other people that are a part of that adoption space than just the surgeon. And so you need to talk to them, especially if they have anything to do with how it's used. But then at some point in time, you got to stop and say, who are all the other people I have to talk to?
Yeah. What are some of the techniques you use to get to your 100 interviews? Esther, you?
Well, as I mentioned, we planned it such that we could go to these large gatherings where we knew there would be a lot of people who are potential customers. Also using personal networks. So one of our co-advisors for the lab is an Emory doctor here. So she used her networks to connect us to some doctors here and talk to them about how they use these therapeutics and such. We tried LinkedIn. It didn't work great for us, to say.
We also showed up to a couple places. We got escorted out as well too. So you're not allowed in here.
And encourages that.
So then just asking good questions. Hey, is there anybody else that you think we need to talk to? If so, why did we not ask the right questions? What questions do you think we should have asked? Maybe if you think that you're heading in that direction, maybe drop them a little bit of clues without telling them where you're going. And I think that can kind of pull out of them a little bit more, because we had a couple people that sniffed us out and said, okay, what are you working on? And then we had somebody tell us, well, if you tell me something, I'll tell you something. And so we had to kind of like a little exchange here and give up a little stuff to get a little stuff without really going too deep into like the technology aspect of it. But you'll get those questions. We've had people offer us jobs during customer discovery.
And my team too. The entrepreneurial lead got 2 job offers.
Right.
So that's another advantage of going to this program.
I've had a couple companies offer me, say, can you come mentor and work with us?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is when you know that so to your point of when you know you're talking to the right people, is that you will be in a conversation with somebody And you will know that you are asking the right questions, you are engaging, you are at the right level when they go, actually, I'm not the person you want to talk to, and this person is, give me 2 seconds and I'm gonna go see if I can pull her to come into the conversation. Right? That's when you know that you're starting to really be, it's this sort of unfurling, and unfortunately, it's really difficult at first because you're not gonna be good at asking the questions. It's gonna be difficult. The better you get, the wider the net opens. You have more people that open that referral net, and then it becomes easier. But it is a good couple of weeks of figuring out.
And people love it when you say, I would really, especially if I'm a student from Georgia Tech or from Emory, and I would really love your expert advice on such and such, and you'll be surprised how many people want to help when they find out you're a student.
Yeah, the office hours is good too. That was very helpful for our team, especially like when we met with Julie, she would sit down and just want to make sure, where we are and make sure that we're asking the right questions, how we're feeling, and she was not just, she was genuinely concerned, and she could tell from our faces if we were fatigued, if we were in line, if we, we're doing what we're supposed to. And so she didn't just care about, the fact that you got your 100 interviews, no, she cared about our team dynamics, how we were engaging, how we were interacting, and it just made it comfortable for us to say, hey, we're struggling with asking these questions, hey, we're struggling with getting these types of interviews, and to bounce that off. So take advantage, if you do go through the program, take advantage of your office hours, even outside of the schedule, because it was very helpful and useful for our team, and not just one instructor, all the instructors, because they offer very different perspectives, and those perspectives will help us to brainstorm and what exactly was our next order of battle.
Any other questions? I have a question. I mean, I think teams go through high points and low points, I think, when they're going through this process, because it is pretty stressful and pretty intense. Do you guys have some examples of maybe a low point and a high point as we're going through this?
I think our first low point was actually during the kickoff
Yeah.
event. So we went in, we knew we had to get, was it 15 interviews by the end of the 3-day kickoff? And we were like, okay, we know some people that we can easily get interviews with, but they're not in DC, so we'll just do a Skype call and that'll be good. We come to the kickoff event and we're told, no, it has to be 15 in person. And we're like, well, what do we do now? We're in DC, it's kind of late. Right. So that's when we tried going from door to door, got them slammed in our face. We still did their Skype interviews. Then we came back and we were told, you don't have enough in-person interviews, you are not allowed to present. Yeah. So that was probably our first low point. And high points was just getting those amazing interviews where you see that they're excited, they start coming up with their own ideas and just want to know more.
There was one time we were in San Francisco, and I was just like, she was like, she does her little, and so she's like, I don't know what else to ask anymore. And we just, like I said, do you want to continue to do more interviews? Because we had a set number for every city that we wanted to be in. She's like, no, I want to go to the pier. I want to go see the water. I want to do this. I want to go eat. I was like, we got to do interviews. She's like, no, I need a break. And so that was a moment where she just hit up like, I don't know what else to ask anybody. And so we just went to the pier and we hung out and, listened to some music and then we were able to recharge ourselves. And then the next day we went at it. So don't be ashamed to take a break in between. I'm not saying don't go to Switzerland like someone did, left us out, but but don't be afraid to take a break to recharge yourself through this process, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get through it. Because it is brutal, it is long, it is a lot of work, it is hard, and especially the travel. I mean, we were on the road 14 days straight before we came back to Atlanta and circled the whole country before we ended up back to DC, back to Atlanta. So
Nikki, you reminded me of something too. You can travel internationally with NSF. You have to ask special permission, but if you have a real rationale and a reason to go ex-US, you can do that.
We have a 2-part question from an online attendee. So the first question is, any recommendations on note-taking during the interview? And the second part is, how do you know when to maybe stop or redirect an interview when someone's gone off on a tangent?
Well, that's a really great question. Nakia, do you want to?
Yeah, so Anna would she's real, I mean, you start talking about cell lines and, cytokines and hex cell, I mean, she's like all in. And sometimes the conversation kind of goes right, goes left. And then sometimes I'll take a pause or interject and ask a question to kind of refocus us to make sure that we're still in line with what we're supposed to be asking, so that we kind of don't get off track. Esther was really good at listening and taking notes. Anna was good at taking notes, and she probably went through about 4 or 5 notebooks through the whole time. I mean, literally. I mean, we're doing like CVS runs, Walgreens runs, the pie extra notebooks, and so much notes. Me, I'm good at just listening and remembering the key and important points, and then maybe sending it out to an email blast. We had the WhatsApp was our communication tool between all of us. And so when we got that insight, we would drop it, or I would remember something and say, hey, don't remember this would be a key point. And before, so that we know when we use Launchpad, we knew exactly what we were putting in there so the teaching team can go in and know exactly what we were doing. So those are some of the tools and things that we did.
That reminds me, there is software that's associated with the program. It's called Innovation Within. And there's a place to put your notes.
Yeah.
And it's super important that you do take good notes. It's usually best if someone else is taking the notes. And the teachers go through those notes.
Yes.
And you are evaluated on how good your notes are. And they will be extremely helpful at, you're doing 100 interviews to go back and look at those notes. So that's a really good question. It's really important that you take good notes and that you put them in the Innovation Within software.
I would also say that in anything, we all look at data differently, okay? And you will be given access to a software platform, either Innovation Within or Launchpad Central. Depending on how you look at data, I really recommend your team put together a Trello board or an Excel spreadsheet or some other way, because what ends up happening is that you start thinking about who might use and adopt this technology you have talked about. And you start to realize that that's actually a big, broader segment, and there's 5 different subsegments. And then you start having more interviews and trying to get more granular with who are the people and how are they differentiated and why is this marketplace a little bit different than this marketplace. And as you go forward, if you don't have a way to tag all of those interviews with some sort of information to help you sort them, then later as you go back, it's really difficult to understand who might I need to go back and talk to. So we all analyze data differently. Think about, you do have to use the software system, that is a requirement, but a lot of times you can find a way to gather your data as a team.
I use Evernote for all my note taking, and so going back to the questions, right? So if you know what question, if you formulated at least a set of questions and you're asking it linearly, then you can, or even bouncing around the questions, as long as you populate answers around that helps. Otherwise, if you know the questions by rote, you sequentially can go about just taking the notes accordingly. And I found that very useful, having access to the notes anywhere, all the time.
To that question, do you set up a hypothesis and then have questions to test?
So absolutely. It's a very hypothesis-driven interview session. So before you go talk to a person, so let's say the first part of the customer discovery is to identify who is the end user, let's say. So you have a hypothesis that, in my case, it was a sensor for environmental pollutants. So the hypothesis was, people who have asthma, COPD, they are the end users, right? So you start talking to them, and then you soon realize by talking to them that maybe there's another customer that you have not thought of, like maybe the first responders, or firefighters. They may be also good customers, and maybe they are better customers because it's an assured pipeline of your product line, right? So the hypothesis is you think this is your customer or not, and then you prove whether that is true, and then identify others. But for every set of the business canvas, you have to have a new hypothesis.
And you'll also create, the more you get into this, you'll create hypotheses about that sort of overarching job that somebody is doing, and whether or not they are particularly satisfied with the tools that they're using. You'll learn to create hypotheses that are specific to a particular marketplace. And they're not questions. Your hypothesis, as we all know as scientists, is not what you ask, right? It's what drives you. But if you are really good at creating a hypothesis about the job the person is doing, how they adopt product and service, and how satisfied they are with their current process, products, etc., then you'll set a set of questions and you'll kind of keep targeted. No, wait, hold on. I forgot to ask about how they're currently getting this done. And that's the thing that I'm missing right now. And so you'll pull the conversation back to where it needs to go.
Do you guys ever record audio from your interviews?
I do, or I did.
As long as you ask permission.
Yeah.
Some people do that.
There's a huge, that's a funny note about depending on what teaching team you get. Some teaching teams are very strict that you do not record audio. They think it absolutely biases an interview. And that if you set the audio, somebody's going to couch what they have to say because they may think about they're being recorded.
That's a good point.
Other teaching teams will say you just really need to ask, and you need to be careful about who you record with. So anyway, that's just a funny, you'll hear various strains of thought. And I think you just, like any tool, you do have to be cognizant that if you set the recording button, people do couch a little bit of what they say. That could, if you're not asking any sort of really intense line of questioning, that may not really matter.
So nobody asked a question about intellectual property here, so I think that's kind of an interesting thing to bring up. So a lot of time, intellectual property is very important in the life sciences, right? But I think that the point of these programs is you do not have to provide enabling information about your technology, right? It's really about what it does for a customer, not how it does it. So I like to have folks have a provisional patent file before they do this program. Some people don't agree with me that that's important. I think it is for life science space, but you really don't have to get bogged down. Matter of fact, you don't even want to talk about the technology.
So I have a question about, so I'm doing mostly basic science research. So I want to know at what point, obviously I don't have a company yet. Sounds like you have to be at translational already, and then at that point then you can maybe participate in such program. So I want to get like 10,000 feet view of what type of operations for more basic research. Towards to the translation. I don't know when.
So is your question, what is the ideal time to take I-Corps?
Yes.
So I think that they're going to want to, maybe you can answer that better. I think that you're going to be interviewed by NSF. So you need to have NSF, if you're taking the NSF program, NSF provenance of your technology. You will be asked questions about your intention to commercialize the technology, because that is the purpose of this. But I think you can be at different stages of that. We had some very early stage stuff where you have a vision that you want to commercialize something and you really want to understand the market so that you can better inform your technology and your research. And that's one of the things also, the benefit of going through I-Corps. The PI, he was a BME professor, he got all these ideas for new grants just from talking to people, new ideas of how to direct his research. So that was another really good thing that came out of this.
There does have to be something.
You need to have
If you were in
intention.
basic research, whatever, so let's say you're in molecular genetics. There has to be some sort of idea for a new kit or a molecule that might have some sort of regulatory capacity, or a new bioinformatics, something that maybe could be packaged into a software. There has to be some sort of something that you're going to use
That
as
you're
the
moving
basis.
towards.
Right. So if you have that, and you do think that it can be intellectually protected, then you have, then there's a space where you could go through this, and it doesn't matter how far along you are. In fact, now I will say, especially, are you the faculty member?
Yes.
So especially if you have somebody in your lab who is a postdoc or a more senior graduate student, it's a really great place for them to go through with you, because it will really, having this on their resume and being able to have this type of process, they will interview so much more superior than all of their peers, because you will learn to go into an interview and turn the table and ask questions about the company and say, what are you doing? And so it's really a very broadening experience.
And it is a prestigious program to have gone through. It looks good on your resume.
Yeah.
On this.
My thought is if you have an inclination, come sit down with someone like me.
Mm-hmm.
And let's kind of just think through this process and look at, because I'm really good at seeing if there's a market for it. I'm really good at saying, okay, yeah, there's a business case here. Let's do a little bit of research around it and see if there's some potential there. Let's see if someone's already done it. If they've done it, if they failed, why did they fail? What other industries are looking for what you're trying to work? And just really just brainstorm through that. And if nothing else, you walk away from me with a kind of a map of, okay, we can at least explore this, but not getting too far away from your research, but enough to say there is a business here. Then at that point, formalizing the idea, or I like to say, I was Albert Einstein said, can't take something complex and explain it simple, you don't understand it well enough. But you have to be able to explain it simple enough to I-Corps, but be able to say, I do see the potential here. So come sit down with something, because that's what my job is, and helping you see through that.
So if you're at Emory, then you can certainly talk to Kevin Lee. He is in the Office of Tech Transfer, or Patrick Reynolds. Are you in Emory? Or?
Yes.
And then, of course, you can talk to Shauna as well, and team, so they can also help.
And then at Georgia Tech, it would be Adventure Lab. That's what we do at Georgia Tech.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, panelists. I think that was really good. Any other questions before we end for today? Thanks, everybody.